Life has a strange way of surprising us when we least expect it. Some stories don't begin with dramatic fireworks or glamorous settings, but with quiet moments in ordinary places. And in those simple beginnings, we often discover the most meaningful lessons. This is the story of Momoko, a middle-aged woman who seemed to have everything under control in her daily life, yet quietly carried the weight of loneliness, unspoken questions, and a desire for change. Momoko owned a small but well-loved restaurant, tucked away in a quiet part of town. It wasn't a fancy establishment, but it had charm, warmth, and a reputation for delicious, heartfelt food. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise, carefully preparing ingredients, checking the tables, and ensuring everything was in order. To her, the restaurant wasn't just a business, it was her identity, her pride, and the place where she invested all her energy. On the surface, the business was going well. Customers came back regularly, praising the meals and appreciating the friendly atmosphere. But behind the smiles, there were challenges that tested Momoko's patience. Many of her young employees were new, clumsy, and often careless. A spilled tray here, a forgotten order there, mistakes that might seem small, but added stress to her long days. Momoko, known for her high standards, often felt torn between frustration and the understanding that youth inevitably comes with inexperience.
いいわよ、自分で飲んで。
いや、でも
あまりカフェイン取りたくないから。
そうでしたか。すいませんでした。失礼します。
Her challenges weren't only about managing a restaurant. At home, when the lights were turned off and the chatter of the dining hall faded, she faced a silence that weighed heavily on her heart. In her middle age, Momoko remained single. It wasn't by choice alone, it was simply the way her life had unfolded. She had prioritized work, family duties, and responsibilities, only to realize later that companionship had slipped quietly through her fingers. Sometimes, when she saw young couples dining at her restaurant, laughing freely, she couldn't help but wonder if she had missed her own chance. The question lingered. Had her time for love already passed? Or could there still be another chapter waiting to be written? To cope with her occasional sadness, Momoko found a small source of joy in the digital world. In the evenings, after closing the restaurant, she would sit with her phone and scroll through social networks. She wasn't looking for romance. What she wanted was conversation, connection, and the chance to share her thoughts with someone who would listen. Among the many casual chats, one person stood out. He wasn't pushy, nor was he superficial. Instead, he showed genuine care, always responding with kindness, encouragement, and gentle humor that made her smile.
はい、ありがとうございます。800円になります。はい、すみません、お疲れいたします。では、200円の。申し訳ありません。
おいおい、やってくれてんだよ。冷てえな、おい。
大変申し訳ありません。神田君、布巾取ってきて。
ふざけんな、お前。それ濡れたじゃねえか。
申し訳ありません。すごく濡れてますね。申し訳ありません。新しいものすぐご用意いたしますので、お席の方はあちらの方に。申し訳ありません。すいません。申し訳ありません。
布巾持ってきました。
もう遅いわよ。
すいません。
片付けて。
はい。
Over time, these conversations became a lifeline. Whenever she felt tired or overwhelmed, she knew she could open her phone and find a message waiting. Slowly, this anonymous friend helped Momoko heal some of the wounds she carried in silence, the doubts about her worth, the heaviness of being alone, and the quiet fear that she was invisible to the world. His words reminded her that she still mattered, that she still had light to offer, and that happiness was not bound by age. Still, a question burned in her mind. Who exactly was this man behind the messages? Why did he seem to understand her so well? And was it safe to let her heart believe in someone she had never met face to face? The turning point came one evening when, after weeks of gentle encouragement, Momoko made a decision that would change everything. She agreed to meet him in person for dinner. It wasn't an easy choice. Doubts ran through her mind. Fears whispered in her heart. But something inside told her that she couldn't ignore this chance. She chose a quiet restaurant across town, a place where she wouldn't be easily recognized. Her hands trembled as she fixed her hair and tried on a dress she hadn't worn in years. In the mirror, she saw a woman who was nervous, hopeful, and maybe even a little excited. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though something extraordinary might be waiting just around the corner.
どうぞ入ってください。
What happened next was something she could never have imagined. Not the older man she had envisioned, but her own young employee, the clumsy, often forgetful waiter she had scolded many times at her restaurant.
寒いですよね。神田くん。
一色さん。
For a moment, Momoko froze in disbelief. Her thoughts raced. Was this a mistake? Could it really be him? Yet the look on his face said everything. He was just as startled to see her, but also undeniably relieved, as though a heavy secret had finally been revealed.
どういうこと？あなた、嘘ついてたの？
すいません。
私だって知っててこんなことしたの？
いや、一色さんだとは知らずに。
このこと誰かに話したら怒るからね。
The air was thick with silence at first. Momoko felt a rush of conflicting emotions, confusion, embarrassment, even frustration. She had trusted this mysterious online companion, confided in him, leaned on his encouragement. And all this time, it had been someone right under her nose. Someone she thought she knew, yet never really saw beyond his clumsy mistakes. But then, as she looked closer, she noticed the sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't a trick or a joke. He hadn't hidden behind his messages to deceive her. He had been himself all along, speaking with honesty and care in a way that he hadn't dared to show at work. For the first time, she saw him not just as a worker who struggled to keep up with her high expectations, but as a person with depth, kindness, and quiet strength. They sat down, still awkward at first, unsure of how to bridge the gap between the world of screens and the reality before them. Yet, something remarkable happened. The young man spoke with a calm confidence that surprised Momoko. Without the chaos of the restaurant around them, he was no longer the clumsy waiter she remembered. Instead, he was thoughtful, attentive, and genuinely interested in her stories. Laughter slowly replaced silence, and the two discovered small joys in their differences. Rather than clashing, these qualities began to complement one another, weaving a connection that neither of them had expected. Something inside Momoko shifted. The doubts that had clouded her mind began to soften. She realized that happiness didn't have to follow the rules she once believed in. Love, connection, and companionship could arrive in the most unexpected forms. And perhaps the biggest surprise was not that her online companion turned out to be her employee, but that he had seen her not as a boss or an authority figure, but as a woman worthy of kindness, respect, and affection. That day, the world seemed a little brighter, the streets more alive, and her steps more hopeful. Something had begun, something fragile, uncertain, but undeniably exciting. For the first time in years, she felt as though a hidden door had opened in her life. Yet, with that new sense of possibility, came a storm of doubts that she could not silence. At the restaurant, every interaction with the young man, once just another employee, now carried a different weight. She noticed the way he smiled when he brought food to a table, the way he quietly helped others without asking for recognition, and the way his clumsiness seemed less frustrating when she looked at him through gentler eyes. Still, as much as her heart fluttered, her mind pulled her back to caution. The first voice of doubt whispered the obvious: their age difference. Momoko was in her middle years, with the experiences and scars of life already etched into her heart. He was still young, inexperienced, and uncertain about his path. How could they bridge such a wide gap? Wouldn't society frown upon a relationship that seemed mismatched on the surface? She imagined the whispers of neighbors, the raised eyebrows of acquaintances, and the endless questions she might face. The thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety. The second voice of doubt came from within herself. She had spent years building a reputation as a strong, independent woman who ran her business with discipline and pride. To allow herself to be vulnerable, to risk being seen as fragile or needy, wasn't that a betrayal of the image she had worked so hard to maintain? She feared that people might say she was foolish, that she had lost her judgment, or that she was clinging to something she couldn't truly hold on to. And then there was the fear of him of his youth, his spontaneity, and the possibility that his feelings might fade as quickly as they had appeared. What if one day he realized that their lives were too different? What if he decided that she was simply a passing chapter and not a lasting story? Momoko's heart had been wounded before, and the thought of reopening those scars terrified her. One evening, after closing the restaurant, she returned home. She quietly asked herself the question that had haunted her for so long. Do I have the courage to accept this? Or should I leave before it starts? Momoko hesitated, but finally admitted the truth. She was afraid. She confessed her worries about their differences, about what others might think, and about the uncertainty of where their connection could lead. To her surprise, he didn't respond with dismissal or light-hearted words. Instead, he listened carefully, his expression serious and respectful. Then he said something that would stay with her forever. I don't see you as older or younger. I see you as someone who cares, someone who inspires me, someone who makes me want to be better. Isn't that what matters? His words struck her deeply. In that moment, she realized that her fears were rooted not in reality, but in the walls she had built around herself over the years. Walls made of caution, of social expectations, of the belief that happiness had to fit a certain mold. And here was someone willing to look beyond all that, to see her not as society defined her, but as she truly was. Of course, the doubts didn't disappear overnight. There were still awkward glances from customers when they laughed together, still quiet moments when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. But each time she tried to retreat into fear, his steady presence reminded her that love is not measured in years, appearances, or approval. It is measured in sincerity. respect, and the courage to accept someone for who they are.
言われそうめっちゃ言われそうだわ
That was the drama of Momoko's journey, not a fight against others, but a battle within herself. The struggle between fear and hope, between caution and courage. And in facing that struggle, she began to understand that the real lesson wasn't about whether a relationship could work, but about whether she was willing to open her heart to the possibility of happiness again. In the weeks that followed, something subtle yet powerful began to change within Momoko. At first, she had thought that her connection with the young man was the heart of the story. But slowly, she realized the truth. The real transformation was happening inside herself.
一色さんも棚卸しですか？
違うわよ。
すいません。
どうして連絡してくれないのよ。彼女とうまくいってるの？
うまくはいってないですけど。
だったらなんで連絡してくれないの？
すいません。
上手になりたくないの？
なりたいです。
上手になりたくないの？
なりたいですよ。
For years, she had lived with a quiet sense of limitation. She believed that certain doors had closed forever, that love was for the young, that new beginnings belonged to others, and that her role was simply to work hard and carry her responsibilities. But this unexpected relationship began to challenge those old beliefs. She began to notice colors more vividly. It was as though the weight she had carried on her shoulders had begun to lift.
ありがとうございます。
More importantly, she started to see herself differently. Instead of defining herself only by her age or her responsibilities, she rediscovered the part of her that was vibrant, hopeful, and capable of joy. It wasn't about pretending to be younger, but about reconnecting with the version of herself that had once dreamed freely, before fear and caution had dimmed that light. The young man played a role in this. Of course, his sincerity, his optimism, his willingness to see her as more than just a boss gave her the courage to embrace change. But the lesson wasn't only about romance. It was about perspective, about how one moment, one relationship, or one act of kindness can remind us that it is never too late to rediscover our own worth and happiness. When we heal inside, it naturally flows outward. By softening her heart, Momoko had not only found her own happiness, but had also created a more nurturing environment for those around her. She realized that society often imposes invisible rules about age, about love, about when and how happiness should arrive. People are told to fit into neat timelines, marry young, succeed early, and follow a predictable path. But life does not always work that way. Happiness does not check calendars or ask permission. It can arrive at unexpected times, in unexpected forms, if we are open enough to receive it. She no longer felt bound by what others might think. Instead, she began to focus on what felt true and meaningful to her. She understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. And in that courage, she found peace. Happiness is not something we must chase in a hurry, nor is it something we can lose forever. It is something we create when we allow ourselves to be open, vulnerable, and willing to grow. Whether through friendship, love, or simply rediscovering our own strengths, the opportunity to change always exists, no matter our age, our circumstances, or our past. Momoko's story is not just about romance. It is about resilience, self-discovery, and the quiet bravery of choosing joy over fear.
次は
And in that lesson, she offered inspiration to anyone who has ever wondered if it might be too late to find happiness
見
again.
せてよ。キャップ見せるお前の手口知ってんだからな。
なんだよそれ知らね
本当かよ。見せろよ。
えやめだって
見せろっ
や
て。見せろって。
分かったまあそう
どんな子なんだよ。
年上
それだけ？
うん
なんだよ。まったくもうよ。だってメガネだって知ってんだからな。
やめだってお前は
まあじゃあさっき戻るわ。
Momoko's journey reminds us that happiness has no deadline. Love, growth, and new beginnings can appear when we least expect them, if we open our hearts. Her story teaches us to let go of fear, embrace change, and trust in the value of our own lives. No matter our age or circumstances, it is never too late to rediscover joy and write a brighter chapter for ourselves.